Hey, welcome to Common Ground, the podcast where we put aside political divides and focus on the national security threats that impact all of us. Because whether we like it or not, our adversaries don't care about our political affiliations. I'm Shane McNeil, and I'm joined today, as always, by my co-hosts.
Amanda Lynn Davis.
Logan.
All right. Thanks, Logan.
You bet.
So, a quick update about the show. The purpose of Common Ground is to find that middle ground that we can all kind of agree on. We are at a point right now in our country where we are more divided than we have probably been in over 100 years.
At least.
Yeah. We are in a situation where the left and the right have divided themselves along ideological lines that almost cannot find any way of coming together, and that's causing a lot of the problems that we're seeing today. So we've developed Common Ground as a way of looking for those issues that we actually can see eye to eye on. We might not think of things for the same reason, but we can both see the same solution, or at least the fact that there needs to be a solution. And that's kind of where we want to go with this show. And we hope that our listeners will, get something out of it along those lines.
I'm so excited. It's so pertinent. As a
Absolutely.
Gen Z student myself, this is going to be a good episode.
Absolutely should be great.
All right. So, with us today, by the way, we have Dr. Sarah Berger, who is joining us. This is a little bit of a big deal because just this week, Sarah graduated with her doctorate and is a brand new psychologist. Has been a licensed professional counselor for a long time, and we are really excited to have this be her kind of coming out ceremony as a doctor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.
Oh my gosh, congratulations. It's so
Yeah.
lovely to have you on. This is such a big moment. Oh my gosh.
I'm excited. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So, talking about today's episode, we're going to be discussing TikTok, which has kind of been overdone. We were talking prior to the episode about the fact that the everybody has talked about TikTok. It's a little played out, and it's just almost a topic that is beat to death. Everybody was joining, Red Book and protesting why did TikTok need to go away, and but the reason that we're looking at this episode is because, in my opinion, this has been framed in entirely the wrong way. That yeah, the government has put out constantly, oh, they're going to steal your data, they're going to steal your data, and it's going to be a national security problem. But that's not a message that resonates with the American people in a situation where you've got Facebook and Twitter, now X, and all of these other corporate applications that are stealing your data. Google, not selling your data, buying your data, whatever the term we want to use is. And at the same time, every piece of technology you use does the exact same thing. How do we sell to the American people that TikTok is a problem when it's doing something that every American application does, right? And that's the reason I want to look at this is not because we want to once again try to make the point that this is a data problem, but I want to take a moment to look at the fact that this is a bigger issue for society. And what does this app say? What is the app and the threat that it proposes say about the impact that China is having on American society today? And that's one of the reasons we have Sarah with us today, is that she's going to talk a little bit about the psychological aspects of this app and what they have seen in the psychological world that TikTok has done to America's society. And we want to find a way to make this a bipartisan opportunity where the left can look at it from a national security standpoint. The Chinese communist control over the app, surveillance, data theft, things like that. But the left-leaning side can look at the psychological effects, the cognitive decline, the human rights suppression with algorithmic control, and why does that matter? And by looking at those two pieces and the fact that both of those sides see a problem here for different reasons, because different things matter to each of them, but there is a common problem. Is that something that I think we can all come to agree on?
Absolutely. And it
Yeah, I
crosses
think
all
the-
generations and groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the lines are not necessarily along political as much as it is recognition of the problem set, in that I'm big in the privacy belief groups, and you always face the same thing of, well, I don't have any secrets. No, you do. I promise you. You have information. I don't think they see the influence or the targeting mechanism, as well as the propaganda side that China can use to affect American citizens. And that's where I think it's much more than just the data problem, which is what it was framed as. And that was a lot of people's defense, like you said, was, well, I already have Facebook, Instagram, I have, whatever random app is out today that's siphoning my data that I knowingly allowed to. Why does it make China so much worse that they're doing it, right? And why can't it be both? Why can't you not like either one, right? Why can't you try to curate and manage the effects these things have on you? And then I'm sure Sarah's got some awesome psychological feedback on what these apps actually do to our brains and our thought processes.
Yeah. So I do think, it's important that we look at both sides of this. So let's take a minute and look at the side that the conservative or right-leaning side might care about, which is the national security and the data issue, which is, TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is, affiliated with China. It is subject to China's national security law. Under that law, any data stored by ByteDance has to be shared with the Chinese Communist Party, and they cannot legally refuse those government demands. This isn't the United States where, you could say no, you could say come back with a warrant. That's not an option. And then, on top of that, the CCP can access the user data there, not just theoretically, but we know it happened. In 2022, leaked internal recordings from ByteDance engineers in China showed that they repeatedly accessed US user data. They showed there was the instance of the journalist tracking scandal where ByteDance used TikTok to monitor reporters investigating ties to China. The 2023 FCC warning that called TikTok a sophisticated surveillance tool disguised as a social media app. All right. What do you guys think about, like, how could that be used to profile, or how can that be used against regular Americans? Why should regular Americans who don't work in the national security field care about that?
Yeah, I think we're quite susceptible to algorithms as it is. I mean, you go online and it's interesting whenever platforms show things that are catered directly to you. We want to go straight to it. We gravitate towards it. It's interesting, like, oh, of course I want to buy that kind of deal. And on TikTok, it's the same thing. But it's quite dangerous because why do they know so much about you? And knowing that someone's watching tends to be an alarming thing. But we don't understand that people are watching because it's only framed as data. It's just data. And like Logan had said, they don't, I don't have anything to hide. Why, if I don't have anything to hide, why should I care about this? Expressing that to the American people of like what's actually at risk with your data. Whenever you show people what their data looks like, it means something way more. It's not just your email address that you used to sign up for something. It's every other platform you're going on. It's private information that you probably wouldn't want out anyway. So I think Americans should care about it in particular because it does impact them directly, but it's the framing here that really matters. And with how the algorithm has played out for us, we're almost too far gone. We need to have that conversation ASAP to be able to actually address it head on because people are going to want to continue on with the algorithm. And if it's not pertaining to them directly, if their algorithm isn't inherently political and they don't feel like it's anything, they're just watching people do dances online, they don't think it's harmful. And outlining that and proving this is what it's being used for. Transparency really matters whenever they are banking on the American populace being blinded.
Yeah, and I think what you said about them having to work with the Communist Party is I would argue that they are probably more than willing and excited to work with the Communist Party. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to. This isn't an American society. This is not a constitutional republic. It's not a democracy. This is a communist country. There is no there's no choice. And I think that's a lot of Americans don't realize that number one, there's no choice. It's not an option up to penalty of you get shot in the face in the street or run over with a tank, as we've seen in communist history. But I would argue that they are not only forced to, but willing and happy to cooperate and be utilized as that sophisticated surveillance or psychological manipulation tool. And that's what people aren't realizing. And I'm not saying that American companies don't do what's better in a more mercenary type fashion of whoever pays them, as we saw with the elections, where, you know, numerous countries ran ads on both sides just to rile people up to cause division in the States. And I'm sure that's still happening. But do you really want to give that much more control to a communist nation that has a horrible human rights history, that has numerously on many occasions suppressed free speech, personal human rights? They're still putting people in camps. And do you think that they're going to be anywhere near what the level of non-maliciousness that you would see in a US corporation? I think to think anything otherwise is completely just ludicrous. They're going to use you, they're going to manipulate you. A tenet of communism is violent rebellion. They're not there to make friends or just inspire you to hang out and be friendly. They're there to sow dissent and take the number one power spot of global power. That's it.
And I think, you know, touching on something you said, it's a little bit of a mirror imaging in the United States with Americans, where they think that because we live in a society where you can say no to the government, and in most Western nations, you can say no. And so it's hard for the average American to wrap their heads around the idea that there is legitimately places on this earth that the government can tell you, no, you can't have that belief. You can't say that. You can't do that. You don't have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of opinions. You don't have freedom of, of how you're going to use the technology that you use, or that you can enjoy sharing images of Winnie the Pooh, right? These are things that you legitimately can't do in China, but that's hard for an American to wrap their heads around. And talking about them wrapping their heads around some of this part, that's where I think that we can move now into you like my transition there, but that's where we can move into our guest, Dr. Sarah Berger. Sarah is a licensed professional counselor and a doctor of psychology, and we are extremely lucky to have her joining us today.
Thank you.
And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed professional counselor. I work mostly with young adults and teenagers. I have a history working with addictions, and not just addictions when you think of substances, but also technology. I really have seen that it's very prevalent now, especially with teenagers. And I think what's interesting about TikTok is this is a platform that I've never experienced having such a hold on young people, and teenagers in particular. I think the scale and the intensity of this platform is something that we just have never encountered before, really.
So that is something that it's, because we get that a lot. I get the question a lot of, well, how is this different than all of the other apps?
Yeah.
And it's the scalability of this app. It's what makes TikTok more addictive, Sarah?
Yeah. So I think it's run differently than other apps in the sense of it's so fast. It's not this long, thing that you can take your time and scroll in. They're usually on average, they're about 3 minutes long for TikTok. I think the most they go up to is 10 minutes. So what this is doing is this is exploiting the brain's dopamine-driven reward system. That's the same system that we have that's responsible for pleasure, motivation, addiction. Every time a user, I picture a teenager, but anytime a user scrolls through, it's releasing dopamine into their brain. It's essentially a high that they don't even know that they're chasing. And every time they swipe, more dopamine is going into the brain. So that's just reinforcing this behavior. And it's creating more of an addiction, variable reward system. So it's the same, like I said, the same system that they use for slot machines. That's, why you see adults in casinos sitting there for hours on end, just like pulling the slots over and over. They're getting more dopamine released into their brain, and it essentially gets harder for them to stop that.
Well, and the interesting thing is, when you mention slot machines, with gambling by law, we've put these things in place that say, okay, if you want to gamble,
Mhm.
we have to tell you that this is potentially addictive.
Yeah.
That there might be a negative side effect to you using this.
Right.
But we don't do the same with apps like TikTok.
There's also an age restriction,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? There's, but we'll give it to our kids at a restaurant just to make them be quiet. That drives me crazy. But yeah.
So can you tell the addictive design, the reward system? How does that, like, what else, like, does that do to your brain?
Yeah. So I think what TikTok uses, just like slot machines, is it's using an unpredictableness quality and to the system here. You don't know what you're gonna get. There is an algorithm and it's trying to find your interests. But there's the surprise factor too, that I think users are really drawn to is they don't know, am I gonna get a video on X, Y, or Z? I don't know. I have to swipe to find out. And it just continues that system in the brain of I need to keep swiping. I need to see what's on the other end of this. Just like, slot machines, you're trying to get all three to line up. But with TikTok, it's the same thing that's going on in your brain. And, unfortunately, this is happening with a lot of young people whose brains are not developed fully. And that's going to have an impact, I think, long term for them.
So Sarah, I guess what's the difference between, an adolescent developing mind and a older adult that's brain is already rotted? Like, how does this affect differently between those two generational differences?
I would say the intensity, I think, is going to be stronger with the kiddos. Adults still I see having this problem of not being able to stop the scrolling because the dopamine hits just keep on coming. But I think with kids and teenagers, your brain isn't fully developed until around 25. So if they're scrolling endlessly before that time, they're losing the ability to practice their critical thinking skills, being able to have any sort of self-restraint at all and practicing, patience and just doing anything else. It's just going to really essentially train their brain to stay with that platform or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be TikTok, I guess, but with whatever platform that they're receiving these rewards from, they're not going to want to stop. And you're going to then have kids who then don't want to go outside, who don't want to engage in day-to-day family activities because that's not where they're getting those quick dopamine hits. They're getting it from the TikTok platform.
So what I'm hearing is that if we wanted to try like a psychological experiment here, Amanda Lynn is right in that that criteria where she may be an adult, she may still be, young enough. So we feed her lots of TikTok and see what the effect is on her brain.
Test it out.
You know?
Yeah, in full transparency, I've used the TikTok app before and I've compared it to other social media platforms. So I find it very interesting, Sarah, how you're driving some distinctions with like the quickness and the variations of TikTok, because I noticed that. And I always would find myself gravitating immediately towards TikTok because it's almost mindless. Is there like a mindlessness activity, like almost just like a repetitive motion of it? Like doom scrolling, for
That's
example.
what I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's like a big thing in my generation specifically,
Yeah.
in Generation Z. We just tend to doom scroll on anything that we do. So even if like the dopamine hit, it's almost like the dopamine hit could be the scroll. Do you have any feedback on that? That's just genuine curiosity on my end.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's the case. Have you ever noticed yourself kind of just touching your phone to see it go off, to see maybe a few notifications, and then you
Guilty.
actually open anything and you're like, wait, why did I just touch my phone? It's
So
because
guilty.
the brain is trying to find that dopamine, right? So it's at a subconscious level that's happening. And that's just us trying to check our phones. So once you kind of get into the daily routine of checking TikTok where you're scrolling through and you're constantly getting those releases, I would say that it would be much more intensified for sure.
So how does that impact your other activities? So we've talked about how it can just suck you in and draw you in, but does it have any cognitive function towards schoolwork, towards attention span and chores or other functions that a lot of developing minds are doing.
Yeah. What I've seen is it's creating more of like ADHD symptoms. Even if a kid or the user doesn't have necessarily an ADHD diagnosis, it's creating that, that impulsivity gets heightened. I feel like the attention span gets shortened. I also think that, socializing becomes a bigger deal
Mhm.
because they're not off
Mhm.
their phones. They're not, talking to other humans. They feel
Yeah.
like they're socializing, but they're not really, right? Like they're
Mhm.
just looking at other people on a screen socializing. And I think we're going to see long-term, issues with that, with younger generations who struggle more to have a conversation that lasts more than 3 to 10 minutes, right? With someone else in the home.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, as a parent that's moved their kids around the world, I know that I see it as a much larger challenge for them and their generation than it was in mine. I mean, I went to one school my entire life for more than 1 year, and I kind of just made friends wherever I went. I found a group, I settled in, I did my thing until I moved. But for them, we moved back to the States about 2 years ago. They came home and would tell me they were having a horrible time making friends. And I'm like, well, what do you do at lunch? And they'd say, well, everybody just stares at their phone.
Yep.
They don't talk. So that socializing that you talked about, I think is a key functional issue that we're going to see in that generation where they don't know how to socialize in face to face. When they hang out with their friends, they stare at their phones together. They
Yep.
don't talk to each other. They just stare at their phones together in the same room. And that's getting together now and doing things. So I think it's an interesting problem set in that it's going to cause ripple second and third order effects all the way through their professional careers as well. Is academia going to have to change how they deliver subject matter to try and engage students that no longer have an attention span over 3 minutes? Is that a 3-minute lesson plan and then we jump to another one? I'm not sure if detox is possible at this point generationally because I see people in my generation, Gen X, that can't do it either. So it's obviously highly addictive and works across age demographics, but I'm just not sure that I see the way out from this.
Logan, they said the same thing about our generation, a long time ago when we grew up in the Sesame Street generation, because
Mhm.
Sesame Street was a 10-minute
Mhm.
instead
Right.
of 30-minute or instead of an hour-long episode that you had, it was broken up into 10 minutes.
Mhm.
And psychologists said the same thing when we were growing up, that the fact that we were being broken up, our attention span was being broken up into 10-minute chunks was causing problems for our generation. If you're, multiplying that now with
Yeah.
TikTok.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
and we didn't have Sesame Street in our pocket then either.
that is
Right
true. Yeah,
now, I can
that's
pull it
true.
out of my desk
Yeah.
and watch it.
Sarah, I've read some stuff about some of the other more explicit issues with this. Like, for
Sure.
instance, TikTok ticks. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because this is the kind of stuff that it sounds made up, but you guys are seeing it in the psychological world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was actually some studies done in Germany because there were a lot of young people who were developing tics. And they were going to providers saying like, hey, I think I have Tourette's syndrome, I'm not sure why, but this is what's going on. But these TikTok tics were very different. So these studies have found that they were appearing in mostly teenage girls, which is interesting because that's not a demographic that typically is associated with developing Tourette's. And they were nearly identical across the cases. So the tics that were happening from the TikTok users were mimicking what the TikTok, performers, influencers, whatever you want to call them, had. So many of the patients were repeating exact phrases and movements that they saw in TikTok videos, like word for word, motion for motion. And that was never something that was seen before. Traditionally, Tourette syndrome is a genetic neurological disorder, and that
Right.
develops, gradually in early childhood, around like 5 to 7. And this was just springing up within adolescence. So it was very, very interesting. What was going on there for sure.
So how do you know that it's not just them
Attention seeking.
attention seeking, or that they're not
Yeah.
just mimicking? How do we know that it's an actual psychological issue, not just some teenager trying to get attention?
Well, I do think that part of it is attention seeking. Those are the same mechanisms that they were using, but I think it was happening more of a subconscious level. The teens were experiencing, validation and engagement from these symptoms, and they necessarily weren't understanding that it was happening at a subconscious level. So I do think that's what was happening there. Well, part of it. I think the other part is that there's a lot of high anxiety and stress. I think, a lot of these young people have been through the pandemic, they've been through social pressures, they have constant social media consumption, and it kind of creates a perfect storm to have anxiety-based symptoms appear. And you mentioned the mimicry. I think that and social contagion is a part of it too. When teenagers watch influencers with TikTok disorders, their brains are subconsciously adopting those behaviors, whether they're trying to or not. I think within these studies, it was shown that it was happening at a subconscious level, which is wild when you think about it, because watching TikTok, however long they were, it was enough to develop symptoms that only occur in a natural neurobiological disorder. So I think that's very telling in itself.
So,
So to go
Oh,
ahead, Chief. Go ahead.
okay, so my first thought was, is this going to be a temporary thing? Is this going to be something that we see short term, or is this basically what we're going to see with a generation now?
Oh, that's a tough question. I hate to say it, but I kind of think that this is the new norm for right now. A lot of the studies, like I said, out of Germany, we're talking about the TikTok ticks, but there are so many clients that I see or students, because I also work in a school I'm autistic now. I have autism, or I have ADHD. A lot of girls are coming forward saying they have ADHD. And when we really talk to them and try and assess further for their symptoms, this is what we're seeing. It's the same thing that's happening in this study with the Tourette's. They're mimicking these symptoms. They are learning these symptoms on a subconscious level from watching people who genuinely have them on a TikTok platform, because they're watching it and they're consuming it so much. It's literally becoming a part of their personality and a part of their brains.
So does that transfer affect more than just physical? And I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Like, let's say the Tate brothers, blatant misogynists running around the world, accused of crimes in what, 3 countries now, but yet huge social media platform. And they, to me, are spouting things that are completely illogical. They sound like a snake oil salesman. This doesn't make sense. No one actually believes this, but yet their followings are huge. So are you seeing the same, I guess, mental transfer from some of these negative influencers towards the children? Are they picking up these, or even adults, who knows, picking up these mentalities and then carrying them forward?
Yes, absolutely. We are seeing this a lot in young men in particular,
Mhm.
who are following these really aggressive, people who have these platforms on TikTok, and they're spewing all this hatred and, all this information, or rather misinformation.
Right.
But these young people, they're absorbing it. They're picking it up. They're making it a part of their personalities, and it's almost, I think, validating to them to have certain thoughts and behaviors that are harmful. And they're learning that it's okay, because they're seeing, these people on these platforms behaving this way and thinking this way and being so bold.
And successful,
Yeah.
in a lot of the way kids nowadays view, or people in general view, influencers as successful. If I can say all these horrible things that the majority of human beings know are wrong, but
Mhm.
yet still have fancy cars, lots of money,
Mhm.
attractive people surrounding me, Jets life, like this, it's a reinforcement. And that's where I think the danger is I had a very young soldier, junior enlisted, that we got home and we were different organizations, and he started posting all this stuff from the Tate guys. And I was like, these guys are idiots. There's
Mhm.
no way you believe this. But he went down that road hard, and he eventually ended up changing, thank God. But he woke up. But I remember thinking, I actually unfriended him for a while, because I was like, I'm not going to watch this, or condone this by maintaining connection with you on social media. But he was completely enveloped in these ideas, and he wasn't, when I knew him, he had none of those thoughts that I knew of, I should say, right? He didn't outwardly express them. It wasn't something he felt comfortable projecting if he did internalize those ideas. But now, a few years later, he's on social media regurgitating all this poison,
Mhm.
And it was very shocking to me to see.
Well, I think that's another problem with TikTok is the algorithm is created for you. So if
Mhm.
the more you interact with certain posts, whether it's liking, commenting, reposting, whatever, um, the algorithm learns that then, and it's going to only show you those things. So if you see one Tate Brother video and you like it, well, guess what? You're about to get a slew more of it. And it
Right.
gets to the point where your stuff is so narrow where all you're really seeing is one side, but because you're doing
Mhm.
so many so quickly, it gives the illusion that no, I'm well versed. I see so many videos. I'm
Right.
so much time doing this, which is
Mhm.
true, you are, but you're only absorbing a small sector of what's out there. And it very
Right.
well could be harmful and misinformation. So that's really damaging.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that not only that, but the technology enables the algorithm, right? The phones are IR scanning or whatever they use. I forget the Doppler or whatever they were using to scan your reactions, to see where your eyes are lingering on a screen. Do you hover your thumb right above the like button but not push it? Do you drift off? Do you pay attention? Where are you locked in and engaged? And that algorithm, like you said, then is custom tailored to encourage you down the path that you like or that it would want to drive you to as we get to other topics, right? But I think that's very interesting that the technology is now there to where it can tell, maybe you clicked it, but you didn't really pay attention, or you were really engaged and you clicked it. So I'm going to
Mhm.
feed you more.
Yeah.
So to avoid taking us down a doom spiral on this, as we get kind of dark, Sarah, what can we do? What can our listeners actually do to fix this, to develop healthier habits? Do you have any
Sure,
recommendations?
I do. So we can, create healthier digital habits. I think one of the first things is setting time limits. Set a timer, especially if it's your child that's using this app, tell them like you only have X amount of minutes on this. That really helps prevent them, if they are doom scrolling from it taking up a large chunk of their day. I think it's really important that we try and train our, brains to deep focus on other things, right? Like reading, even watching longer form videos, is going to be better than the quick 3-minute things. Having in-depth conversations, right? Getting back to what we used to do many moons ago, talking with, human to human, family member to family member. Making that a priority, I think, is really important. I think if it is your kid that's on these apps, really monitoring them. Please don't assume that any of these apps, but TikTok in particular, is harmless because they can be very harmful, especially if they're not being monitored. You can set a time limit and you can say, hey, I'm going to sit on the couch with you, right? Like, I'm not going to be necessarily over your shoulder, but I'm going to be just, keeping an eye and ear out for what it is that you are scrolling. And then lastly, I would just recommend having like a digital detox. Create some space in your day to not be on your phone at all. I mean, especially before bed, there's so much data there that says please don't do that. But you know, if it's a true addiction, starting out small and working your way up, I'm gonna put my phone down for a few minutes, then a few hours, and it is possible, I promise.
All right. All right. Thanks, Sarah. And once again, we are very happy to have you with us today and
Yeah.
to be be part of your celebration of being a new doctor.
Thank you.
We are very lucky to have Sarah join us, and hopefully we will have her back again soon on another episode. So to kind of recap today, TikTok, it's not just a social media app, right? It's you could almost see it as a psychological experiment that the Chinese Communist Party is running on the American people, and we're the test subjects. And there is that huge aspect of this, and on top of that, though, it's also a national security threat. That is a real problem, right? And American mental health, by the way, is a national security thing too. If we have too many crazy people, then that's not good for our national security. Both sides of the political aisle have a reason to be concerned about this, and it is something that we need to address before it's irreversible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as someone who's living in Gen Z and has been surrounded by TikTok and those kinds of using mimicry language, like we do it all the time. It's part of everyday life. We have to address it now. And it's becoming more than just social interaction. It's also becoming how we interact with our government and sowing discontent. So addressing it now is really important. So thank you, Sarah, for being here as well and having this conversation with us.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for actually adding your legitimacy as a newly minted doctor to my random theories on how this all works. I really appreciate it. But yeah, it's just another good reason to get into national security where you can't have your phone all day. Just
Yeah.
saying.
Hey, there you go. You know, if more people worked in a skiff, we would have less TikTok addiction. So, all right. Well, so for the next episode that we hope you guys will join us on, TikTok is just one part of the bigger technological issue in this country. China and Russia are using social media tools, cyber tools, digital manipulation to influence what Americans see, believe, and what they do. If you've ever wondered why online discussions feel increasingly chaotic, divisive, reactionary, hopefully the next episode will help you guys understand a little bit more about what that's doing. All right, that's it for today's episode of Common Ground. If you found this discussion insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We're here every other week breaking down the national security threats that impact all of us, no matter where you stand politically.
And if you liked what you heard, leave us a review. It helps more people find the show and join the conversation. Plus, we promise to read every single one, unless, of course, it's written by a bot from Beijing or a Winnie the Pooh costume.
You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky for updates, behind the scenes content, and more ways to stay informed. Got a topic you want us to cover? Let us know. We love hearing from our listeners.
And remember, national security isn't left or right, it's about all of us. Until next time, let's find some common ground.